So thank you so much for tuning to this event. Today we're going to talk about the art of killing your roadmap by Roxane Hassler, the head of product management at Pitch. But first, let me introduce a little about myself. My name is Jorge Herna. I'm an associate product manager here at Product People. I have more than 5 years of experience working as a business development manager. I also have experience working in sales. And nowadays I'm working at Product People, helping companies like Emma or Epicwell on their product activities. But now let's talk about Product People itself. What do? We help companies to discover and deliver great products faster. We do the unglamorous work of product managers on an interim basis from 3 to 36 months. We aim to onboard fast, align teams, and deliver outcomes. Last but not least, we empower our product community to share their knowledge generously. Okay, now we are going to throw a poll because we are very interested in knowing what is your opinion about roadmaps. Okay, so answer, please. Thank you. Okay, let me enunciate the questions. The first question: in your team or company, roadmaps are A, secret and untouchable; B, subject to revisions and adjustments; C, very flexible; D, we don't use roadmaps at all. The second question is: in your team or company, roadmaps are used by A, PMs only; B, product teams; C, product and non-product teams; and D, everyone has access to roadmaps. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to answer this poll, and we will review the answer in a couple of minutes. Okay, perfect. Please, Mansour, share the answer so we can have a better idea about what the attendants think about roadmaps. Okay, so for the first question, in your team or company, roadmaps are, okay, 69% of subject to revisions and adjustments. Makes sense. We're probably gonna talk about this later. And the second question, in your team or company, roadmaps are used by 46% to product teams. Makes completely sense. Okay, thank you so much for answering this poll. We will talk about this later. But now, thank you so much for your patience. Roxane Hassler, the head of product manager at Pitch. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to lead you to present your presentation.
Thank you, Jorge. So I hope that everyone can see my screen. Looking for some notes. Yes, perfect. Yeah, hello and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to talk about a topic that has been very high on my agenda throughout the last couple of weeks, especially the last couple of weeks of 2021, when we went through a major change. And the topic of this talk is the art of killing your roadmap. I want to set the expectations right before jumping right into it, because I know that the name of this talk is very clickbaity. So I want to frame this a little bit so you can understand how radical or not radical it will be, and then decide if you really want to join for the next 20 minutes, which I really hope you will. So what to expect from this talk? I'm going to give you a look into product development processes at Pitch, which scaled really fast throughout the last 2 years, and where we also went through one big milestone, which is moving from a pre-launch company to a product that is like in a beta and then out in the public. Then I'm going to share some insights about how the roadmap in our case is leveraged for multiple use cases across the company. I'm going to pose the question on when to challenge tooling and when to challenge the underlying problem. And I'm going to serve you some strong opinions on heavy backlogs. What this talk is not about, it's not a sermon on the redundancy of roadmaps altogether. So I'm still a product manager. I love planning. So we do have a product roadmap, but it's just not the one that we had 2 months ago. So just that you don't like exit this call a little bit or this session a little bit too early thinking, oh, pitch operates completely without a roadmap. So this, unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know, matter of interpretation is not the case. And I'm not giving you a comparison between different roadmap tools, and certainly no blueprint to more efficient product management, because I don't think anything like this exists. Yeah, but first, I mean, Jorge already very shortly introduced myself. I'm going to follow up with this now. So my name is Roxane. I have 7 years of product management experience. I started as a freelancer, then joined a fintech as my first full-time job as a product manager. That was already in the SaaS space. So I entered as a product manager in the SaaS space and then never left it. I joined a company called Circular like 6 years or so ago as the first employee. So I started on exact the same day as the two founders. So that was a massive greenfield for me to define what kind of product we were building. It was an expense management tool where I created the mobile and web application. So that was huge fun, like not only the strategic part of it, of creating the product, but also defining what product means in this company and how we will roll process-wise. And then 2019, I joined Pitch, also as the first product manager, but the company at that stage already had around 30 people and a product that was ready for the beta phase. Yeah, and since then we grew to a size of, I think we're 170 people right now. And yeah, went through various really exciting stages. And for those who don't know what we're doing, Pitch is a SaaS company with the mission to help combine the best parts of productivity, design, and presentation software to help teams create beautiful decks. So what you're seeing here is obviously a pitch presentation. And yeah, and now I'm going to jump right into the topic, which is roadmaps and killing roadmaps. I would like to start with a little bit of theory to create a foundation for the conversation that I would like to have in the next 20 minutes. So if you just Google what a roadmap is, you will find a definition that's something along the lines of what you see here. I'm reading this out aloud now. The product roadmap provides a thoughtful, proactive framework that product teams can use to organize their work. A well-defined product roadmap helps teams focus on the important task of long-term value creation for customers. Yeah, and most of us will probably just accept this definition because we kind of know what our roadmap is, and there's no real reason for looking it up because it's something that we deal with every day. So why would we pull out an encyclopedia to find out what this tool is that we see every day, right? I'd like to challenge this because I think it's actually, it brings benefits to question what this one thing is that you pop up in front of you every single day. I recently, let's not say recently, like before jumping into this whole change process of us redefining our roadmap, I read this quote by John Cutler, which I really like, because when he talks about roadmaps, he highlights an aspect that seems like very obvious, but I don't know, becomes like really interesting when you think about it a bit longer, because he highlights the aspect of a roadmap being a communication tool. And he also says that a great roadmap is a catalyst for conversation. He also points out that a roadmap communicates your thinking about focus and sequencing, which is similar to what we just saw on the other slide. But if you think about your roadmap as your main communication tool, it kind of becomes more than that, because it starts putting you in a position where you think about your roadmap as the foundation for your product culture. Because if it's the one tool that you use for your communication, it also determines how inclusive it is and if it's open for everyone. Like basically what we just asked in these two first questions. Yeah, and let's freeze this when we continue with the next couple of slides, because I'll come back to this communication topic over and over again. So how do we use our roadmap at Pitch, and how did we use it? There are two things that I would like to point out before going to the next slide. first things first, at Pitch, we use Notion for our roadmap. I said that I'm not going to talk about tooling, so I'm not giving you like too many details about how amazing and not amazing Notion is, but I think it's helpful to notice, because then you can actually visualize how we use our roadmap. Because Notion is a free-form tool, you can completely get lost there because it is so free-form, or you can create like the most detailed and tailor-made processes there that really fit your needs. This is what we basically did. So our roadmap is a database that has like different kinds of properties that are relevant to understand when you're planning to work on certain items, what they are about, what team is working on them, like the responsibility in terms of owner within the team, you name it. It has some great advantages. It also has some great disadvantages regarding this free-form format, which I'm going to get back to later. And the second thing that is very specific about Pitch is that we don't have a lot of product managers. So some of you might already connect the dots, like free-form, few product managers could be a recipe for chaos, which I wouldn't say it was, but it is a recipe for certain challenges. So I have this slide here, which I hope I will not get lost in because it has a lot of text on it. The roadmap has historically been used as something that was like very feature first driven. So a lot of people like here who are listening right now, who have worked at a company before it launched, might have had exactly the same phenomenon where you have a roadmap that's basically just like a list of things that you want to get into your product before you launch it. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because you cannot really base the stuff that you do around a lot of insights, because the insights are like very discovery driven, not so much data driven. So we had like this list, and it got longer and longer because presentation software is just like really complicated. Finding an MVP is nearly impossible. At some point we triaged this into stuff that we want to get done before launch, stuff that we will do after launch. Then we pushed other things into an idea backlog, which was like still the same roadmap, but with a label that said idea. So I know, like over the years, the backlog just like snowballed. It got like really big. And once we got closer to launch, we started planning on a quarterly basis, which I guess is like really normal in product teams. And then mostly discuss the next quarter while still carrying this backlog around. The roadmap in our case is used by product teams, but also by leadership, marketing, sales, customer support. I probably missed a couple of departments, but what I want to say here is it's like really inclusive. Anyone can use it. Anyone can comment in it. Not anyone should edit it, but sometimes it still happens. So there are no real boundaries there. And what I really like about our roadmap is that it's also one place where we collect a lot of things. So it's not only a list, but when you click on the items in the roadmap, you get feature pages that then present you research, project plans, timelines, documentation once it's shipped. So it contains a lot of information that in former companies we actually had at a different place. So all of the teams that are working with the roadmap also have very easy access to the context that is related to why are we even building this and what does it mean? What's the scope? Yeah, so this has a couple of advantages. So having all in one place, as I said, makes information very easily accessible to everyone. Then Notion in general, the format is very easily adjustable. So over the time, we had a format that worked really well for our small team of like 30-ish people. Then we adjusted it for 100-ish people. Yeah, well, and just very recently we adjusted it again. So that's a big advantage. And the inclusiveness is something that I think really positively shaped our product culture. However, I realized at some point that we had a fundamental problem because when certain questions were like asked around like, when are we building XYZ and what's the scope of this and this, I realized that referring to the roadmap didn't work any longer. So people would accept the fact that we have asynchronous communication in place where you could find information, but it didn't really help them get what they wanted. And yeah, and as the product manager that I am, I started like really looking into the problem space and created an audit, talked to multiple stakeholders to understand what the issue was, because it felt a little bit hard for me to be super empathetic there, because in my mind, it was like, we have all of the information, just like open the roadmap, spend some time with it, you'll figure it out. Yeah, that's why I started like to have all of these conversations and do the audits to really map out what the problems were and to see it through the lens of the people who have to deal with the roadmap. And ironically, the main challenges that we have, or that we had, mapped directly to the advantages that we had. So all of these positive things that I highlighted on the slide before were directly tied to disadvantages that became more severe over time. So having all in one place obviously led to clutter. And this also had to do with like having few product managers who were guarding the quality of the information that landed on the roadmap. Then the adjustability, I mean, great thing in theory, but then you have different teams, different standards. And if you are in a supporting team, let's say customer support, and you just want to get like a baseline degree of information from different departments or different product teams, you'll end up having to learn and unlearn certain behaviors and then adapt them to the teams that you're working with. And that wasn't really ideal, and it definitely wasn't efficient. And yeah, as I said, inclusiveness, amazing thing, but the templates, for example, that we worked with for the roadmap included stuff like formulating hypotheses, KPIs. But if then people who were not actually product managers had to answer these questions, like what is the KPI for this feature, it led to frustration. So they would sometimes just like not answer these questions or answer them incorrectly in a way that it didn't really fuel their workflow, but just like kind of bottleneck them from getting into things that are more relevant or yeah, just like more important at a certain point in time. So when I talked to one of our engineering directors about the audit and the issues that I saw, he coined a term that I really liked, which is roadmap bankruptcy. Because our company just has like grown so fast over the course of 2 years that the roadmap that we initially used became a burden. And while there were like multiple issues that could have been addressed, the biggest one definitely was the legacy of features, like this backlog that snowballed over the years and became bigger and bigger. And that's, I felt this sounded a bit poetic, when your ambitions become a burden, because it's like, it is kind of a tragedy, right? You have like all of these plans and they really motivate you, and you don't really want to get rid of them because you know why they happen to end up in the roadmap, and you spend time researching, then you might have put them on hold again. And just like ignoring them happens at some point because you cannot do everything at the same time, but you don't really want to accept the fact that it becomes a bottleneck in your processes and that maintaining them actually takes up a lot of your effort and capacities. So at some point we actually had 690 items backlogged, which for a team of 100 people is way too much. And when I say 100 people, I'm not talking about like our engineers. I'm talking about like the whole company. And yeah, we just felt like this is something that will keep our grandchildren busy. Do we really want this? The biggest issues connected to this huge backlog were irrelevant information, but also redundant information, because we ended up having like multiple things that partly overlapped. Then we stopped working on some things, started working on other things, and the information that we had just didn't matter anymore. And sometimes it was like really hard to identify what was correct and what was incorrect because of different teams, different standards. The relevance, yeah, okay, I already said that. Then what I found really troublesome was that the roadmap was no longer a reliable source of our product strategy. It was for the quarter that we planned for, but everything that was like more ahead of us, like after the next 3 months that we planned for, was like super fuzzy and not really tied to bigger company goals that we had. Some people knew that, especially the ones that have been with Pitch for a long time. But then new joiners, like I always felt like they must be so confused. They like start here and then you're like, what is this about? Like, why do we have this weird mix of things that are also on completely different altitudes, like super detailed and then very, really high level. And last but not least, and I think this has like a really strong impact on communication, product culture, is the way you approach your plannings, whether it's feature first or outcome first. And if you just always like work off your backlog, you definitely have a feature first mindset. And I think that's fine before you launch your MVP, but you continuously have to shift into outcome first, because at some point you really want to focus on what you want your users to feel like when they use your product, and not what you want to serve them, and then just like see how, like to what habits that leads. And connected to this, I think it's also important to highlight that a big backlog leads to teams picking up too much stuff at the same time. So we realized that we had a very high work in progress count, which ended up putting teams in a position where they felt like they were under delivering, but they actually weren't. They just had a scoping problem because they felt like they had too much on their plate. And if that happens, then they just like pushed things into the next quarter. So I know it's like really a vicious cycle. So one obvious thing, or I'm not sure if it's so obvious. Actually, when I created this presentation, it became less and less obvious. And I was wondering like how I can like tie a nice narrative around this, because it seemed like there's no correlation between tooling and the problem that I'm like explaining here at all after a while. But when we, like after we had this audit, very soon when talking to stakeholders, I was asked, well, can we just like switch the tool? Maybe Notion is not for us. It feels like we have outgrown it. We need something that is not free form anymore. And I partially agreed, because I felt like since we don't have so many product managers, maybe we need like more automation, and maybe the right tool can actually help us get rid of some of the busy work. And I still feel that the right tool can actually support you become more efficient. But after all, like the tool is hardly ever the problem. And I think it's really mostly the people using the tool. And as I said, it can be a great support, but it's not your problem solver. Yeah, the best tool can just be absolutely meaningless if the people using it don't know how to leverage its potential. And especially in the case of our roadmap bankruptcy, it would have been very naive to go through this huge change process. And everyone who has ever switched to Jira knows that this can be like super, super painful, would have just led to more problems if the underlying problem, which is our culture, the way we communicate, the way we collect information, is corrupted. Yeah, so we did something that sounds very simple now, but it actually took us a while to realize that, which was putting our existing roadmap with more than 690 items in the backlog into a dark and hidden place on Notion. And yeah, as I said, this sounds easier than it was, because I mean, kind of an obvious solution, but there was a lot of emotional detachment to the stuff that was collected there, with so many people being involved in the definition of our MVP and the huge vision into like the very first hours at pitch, and the idea that we had what our product should become. Yeah, so as I said, we got rid of it, we created a new one. And I already spoiled this at the beginning, so we don't operate without a roadmap at the moment, but we have a different one. And what we wanted to make sure is that if we start with a new roadmap, we don't want to like have exactly the same conversation around roadmap bankruptcy in 6 months from now. So how can we ensure that if we like reboot and move back to square one, we actually start with something meaningful that fuels our teams with the right energy and motivation and set them up for success. So today we have the same game, like we still have a roadmap on Notion, but it's super reduced. So at the beginning of the year, the teams came back and they just had like a roadmap without a single item on it. And I was a bit worried about this, because I feel like a little bit of guidance is still helpful, although I'm not like a huge advocate of like top down, let's just tell people what to do. But still, having something to start with is better than having just a blank slide or blank piece of paper. But it actually worked really well. Like I got amazing feedback. Teams loved the green field that they were operating on, because, and that's the thing with backlogs, you don't need to write stuff down to be reminded that something is urgent, because the important things resurface all the time anyway. So they knew what the most important things were that they needed to work on. And if they didn't, like all of a sudden they had like the right space or enough space to go into workshops, figure stuff out, ask the right questions, and not feeling tied to a structure or a backlog that they were carrying around with them. So the new rules that we applied were time frame. So right now, when you use the roadmap and add stuff, it can only be added for the next 3 months. Like there's a minimum of 3 months. We don't want teams to like only add one thing that keeps them occupied for the next 2 weeks, but then leave everyone else in the dark about what happens next. Some teams actually need to or feel more confident planning for the next 3+ months until 6 months. My opinion is that it gets really fuzzy after 3 months. I mean, it can already get fuzzy after 2 months, but that might be might be caused by other problems. But yeah, just like, I think it's fine to be open and not say it must be exactly 3 months, but it is a recommendation. If you want to go until 6, fine, but please not start going beyond these 6 months, because this is just like a recipe for a new huge backlog. Then we now really put simplicity over detail, which means when you add a new feature to your roadmap, the only 2 questions that you have to answer are, what is it? Ideally answered with 2 sentences. And why are you doing it now? And I think this is a great baseline for all of the teams, regardless of what their area of responsibility is. Then we allow flexibility where needed. So we're not at a stage where we need to have like crazy processes for the whole company. So if you feel like you want to go beyond these 2 simple questions about what is it, why are we doing it, go ahead, add all of your KPIs that you want to, but it's not a requirement for all of the product teams. And another thing that we actually didn't do a lot before we went through this change was introducing different formats for different use cases, because I told you like everyone at Pitch uses the roadmap and everyone like should continue using it to get information asynchronously. But our leadership team just doesn't have the time to like dig into the details on the roadmap. So we have different formats now. It could be like presentations, obviously we use presentations for everything, to inform what the pillars are working on, but then also like in-person meetings, very old school, where we just like talk about stuff and tell what we're doing. It's kind of funny. I feel like since the pandemic started, some teams went all in with asynchronous communications. Others have like Zoom calls all the time. I think we had an uneven mix due to the different pillars that we have. And now we're like actually setting formats and expectations on how this should be done. And it's working really well, actually. Yeah, and this was like the main part. I would like to wrap this up because I don't know, while I was talking, I felt like, is this like too much information? Is it too little? Let's just like boil everything that I said down to 4 key statements as something to take away, and maybe then also discuss in the Q&A section. So first things first, and this is actually my biggest takeaway from this change that we went through, is that your roadmap isn't only a plan, but it's a catalyst for conversation. And with it being a communication tool, it also is a very, very crucial part of your product culture, and something that you should maybe not regularly, but every now and then review and see if it actually meets your company standards. Oops. Okay, you still see. Yeah. I just switched something on Zoom, but it didn't have an effect on this presentation. Yeah, the second takeaway is a tool will hardly ever solve problems caused by the ones using it. So some problems can be solved very easily, and tools can help you facilitate processes, but could also mean new challenges that you should be aware of. Then I would like everyone who's listening to ask themselves if their backlog is the right fuel for their engine, and try to answer this as unemotional as possible. And the last one, and this is something that I actually didn't say during the last 20 minutes, but I would like to say it now, is that whatever you do, it's totally fine if you don't get it right from the start. I think most of the people listening right now, that's just an assumption, are also working in a startup environment, or at least in a company that loves agile methodologies. And this is a very fortunate situation to be in if you can just like hit pause and reflect on what you're doing and try to do it better. And that also kind of takes the pressure out of redefining processes or redefining the way you work in general, because all you can do is like try to optimize it for the moment, but then also be very open to re-optimize it in a couple of months from now. And this definitely made this whole roadmap project easier from my side, because every other way I would have over theorized it and then ended up with exactly the same result, or maybe even a worse one, because trial and error to me is still the best way forward. And that's it. Thanks all for sticking around. Before we start the Q&A, I want to ask you to maybe not only bombard me with questions, which you're totally invited to do, but maybe also share your experience around roadmaps, and if you also went through similar changes, how you feel about backlogs, if you want to like join the backlog rant, or if you have like a completely different perspective. And in case you don't want to reach out in front of the other participants, you can reach out via LinkedIn or Twitter. And also, in case you like pitch is hiring. I guess a lot of people who have talks here make a little bit of self-promo. Yeah, check out our jobs page, and there are product positions open. And if they're not, I know that there's some open, so reach out, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the presentation, Roxane. I think that we learned a very valuable lesson here about roadmaps. And I like the quote that you don't expect to get right, you know, like as soon as you're starting a new thing. And it's very important to have this mindset on your mind. So, okay, so before continuing with the presentation and the QA section, give me a moment. Can you see my screen? Okay. Can you see my screen? Just, okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Sure. To give you some time to think about the questions that you want to ask to Roxane. Also about what she asked to, okay, share your experiences and what do you think about backlog and roadmaps. I'm going to talk a little about the product people and what we do, how can we work efficiently with different companies as a product agency. So here we have some cases where we consider ourselves that we are most useful. First, you got founded and need to grow your product team by 1 to 5 PMs. Second example would be when you have a parental leave, for example, like Roxane at Beach. And then when you have a person, a PM has left the company and you need time to hire, unconsciously. Also, another example is when you have a temporary initiative and it is important and easier to complete a mission. And finally, you want to improve some parts of the product, you want to improve some parts of the company, so you need to hire a more product team to get those things done. Here you have some positive feedback from our clients. And if you are interested in the way how we operate on some some business cases, please feel free to reach out, and you can take a look at our website at getproductpeople.com. Finally, here you have a team. As you can see, we are a very diverse company. We have people from all around Europe, from different places of the world, too, with different backgrounds and from different industries. But our legal entity is based in Germany. We are also hiring. That's an important thing. It's not just Roxane who said that. We are hiring talented product manager people, and we are also hiring senior business development manager. So please, in case you're interested, send your application to productpeople.join.com. Okay, so now I think I give you enough time to think about your questions. I'm going to review the questions that are in the Zoom chat and then the rest of the chat, so we can start with the Q&A. Okay. Thank you for your attention. And so from a moment, please. I need to check the. Hi. Okay. I need to check where is the here. Okay. So far, I can see there are some questions.
I go first.
Yeah, please go first, Master.
Great. So thanks again, Roxane. And my question was actually, it came to mind when you mentioned the newcomers at pitch and how they were, a bit weirded out, maybe, or unfamiliar with the idea. So I'm just curious to know, like, how would it be? Did you ever encounter any type of misinterpretation or like difficulty adapting or adjusting to that, especially from people who might be coming from a place where backlogs were really used heavily and they're just used to that?
So you mean how we encounter people who are unfamiliar with the idea of not having a backlog?
Yes. So once they joined pitch, like, did you have any resistance to that? Did you encounter any problems with it, and how did you like convert them into this new way of doing it?
Yeah, no, actually not at all, because I mean, it's the product teams at our company, they have like freedom of like figuring out how they want to work. So the roadmap is really a document that is used company wide. That's why we have like this rule of like only looking into the next 3 to 6 months. But as a product team, you are still open to have a backlog, but in a different place. So we don't want to like promote this idea throughout the whole company. And some teams, I mean, they use Miro, for example, to do brainstormings on certain opportunities and then keep it there. Others have it in presentations, but we just want to keep the roadmap as tidy as possible.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this explanation. That's true. Let's continue with Anand, and looks like who wants to ask a question.
Yeah. Hi, Roxane. Thank you, first of all, for the great, wonderful presentation. I really love the idea of the roadmap bankruptcy and how you can improve the road mapping process. But so whenever you create a roadmap, it needs to be validated. And if I understand that in this case, you keep things in the roadmap, so that you can cover that in the next 3 months. So how often do you validate whatever features that are or outcomes that are there in your roadmap?
Yeah, so how should I answer this? Because I mean, we just very recently switched to this approach. We have a company-wide strategy for the next 2 years, which also includes a product strategy, but it's very high level. And for the first 2 quarters, like all of the product teams and pillars have themed their focus. So they know in which area they see the biggest opportunity. And now that the opportunity space is known, it's like more looking into what are the exact solutions that we want to focus on. And I'm mostly focusing on, I didn't say that at the beginning, at the pillar called Create, which is around the whole presentation creation. And what we did there is like we scoped it out for the next 3 months. We have an idea of what we want to do until June of this year. But by the end of this quarter, we will actually challenge our own ideas of what we planned. So classic product review to some extent. And I mean, we already know what kind of questions we need to ask ourselves, because we're like observing data and all the time. And we have regular check-ins with customers where we gather qualitative data. And we kind of know that the theme that we set ourselves might only be relevant for the first quarter. So I don't know, you always like have kind of a gut feeling about which direction you're going to. So yeah, actually like a mix of answers. And I think this is also universal to product teams. We use data, qualitative insights, also gut feeling, and then make sure that we challenge ourselves on a frequent basis.
All right. Nice. I mean, I'm looking forward to discuss this, of using this way of communicating the roadmap with my team.
Nice.
It is always challenging. Okay, we have another question from the YouTube channel. Andras Juath, I guess that I spelled it right correctly, please. I'm sorry in advance in case. So the question is, what's the granularity of the items you are displaying on your roadmap? Could you share an example roadmap item for a capability that you have already delivered? So no longer secret.
That's a great question. Like I normally answer this with, it should cover 2 to max 5 weeks of implementation work. And I also like to just call it an epic, because you shouldn't put stuff on the roadmap that can be implemented with like a couple of lines of code, but something that you actually need to like split down into user stories. So as a rule of thumb, I'm thinking about something that we will very soon implement without like giving too much away. Yeah, so we will change our font controls in Pitch, for example, and these are a couple of smaller changes that we need to do, and we clustered them into one item on the roadmap, because we could have also like gone ahead and just like implement one improvement at a time and then just like roll them out on a rolling base. But in this case, we actually wanted to make sure that it also is covered in the release notes, because we know that it will have a positive impact, especially to users who are used to competitor tools like PowerPoint and so on. So we wanted to make sure that these all go into the product at the same time. So this collection of small improvements was then, fell under one name that is now a part of the roadmap. I hope that makes sense. I think that's a risk-free thing to announce. Other things are a bit bigger and maybe also not estimated in the correct way. I mean, sometimes we still end up with things that are like way more than 5 weeks, and only when you start working on it, you realize how you can break it down into meaningful, smaller epics.
Okay, wow. Okay, well, it was intense, but I think more or less I understand. I hope that Andras could get the question answered. I see that there is a hand raised, but first I would like to introduce the question from Leo, one of the chats, just because it was before. The question is there still some high-level company goal or other constraints to have the teams running in the same direction? What's your role in the process?
Oh yeah, 100%. So we do have company goals. We actually just like framed them for the next 2 years. So at the end of last year, we shared like a 2-year game plan. And that really set the tone for the conversations that we need to have around strategy and the roadmap. And my role there is, I'm not sure if you actually heard this, if that was like part of the live streaming, but I actually just returned to Pitch after parental leave in January. So right now my role is in the create pillar, which is at the core of what we're doing with presentations. You create them, right? So I'm translating these company goals into meaningful actions that are relevant when you create presentations. But then at the same time, I'm also like looking at the processes and supporting teams when it comes to getting the processes right of figuring out what the roadmap should be. So the strategic part is only for one pillar in the company, but otherwise I'm mostly working on processes.
Okay, well, I think that was a good answer. I think Leo has a pretty good answer there. Okay, so Ashwani, there you go. You can ask your question. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for this quick presentation, Roxane. My question is around, for example, like there's a product and there are different product teams with product owners. Like, for example, 5 to 8 product owners are working on the same product. So in that manner, it's very hard to manage the roadmap, because there are changes from one team, there are upgrades from one team, and also in this particular case, who should be, like for example, as Anand say, who should be the responsible for validating and managing a roadmap in that case, and how you think my second question is, can also different product teams can also have their own roadmaps, like they can work on, or it should be always single, that a complete focusing onto the product only, not to the product teams. I mean, agile Scrum teams, yeah.
That's a great question. Like regarding responsibility, I think that's very individual to the environment that you're in. In our case, like the product teams own their roadmaps, and this is also how it's split. So we have this one, let's call it master roadmap, and then on Notion you can create segmented views or filtered views for the different teams. So we have one place where we have the roadmap for the whole company, but the product teams themselves, they have like their sub pages where they have a filtered view that's only relevant for their team. And then when it comes to responsibility, the product team is like responsible for owning the features on their roadmap end to end. They are also involved in the decision of what should be on the roadmap, but the prioritization is a conversation. So, I mean, how many teams do we have? At least 15. If you like silo this too much, you end up like building different products, and you don't want to do this, right? That's why these teams are clustered into pillars. So we have 3 pillars, and the pillar leadership then makes sure that for all of these product areas, we have like one theme that is directed at the same goal. And then we have company leadership, like it's like a cake with different layers, right? And on top, you then have the company vision and the strategy that makes sure that everyone works towards like this cherry on top. And yeah, which means the question about responsibility is a tricky one, because there are different kinds of responsibilities. And the important thing that needs to be figured out then is like how you get the communication right, so that in the end, everyone works towards the same bigger goal. I'm sorry, I feel like I give really long, complicated answers. Feel free to like add like a follow-up question if you feel like it pushes me more into like answering with one single sentence.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a very well answered. Thank you very much for that. And how you manage the changes that could happen inside the roadmap, because it could also blocks other teams' tickets or features. So how that things can be well managed because of prioritization, or do you think something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's like really a case-by-case question, right? So it hardly ever happened that any of the features that we planned on the roadmap was released on exactly the day that we estimated it to be released. And that obviously had an impact on other teams where there were dependencies. So it's just like really important to have an early alarm system or something like that, so that you have like this frequent conversation around like where do we actually stand with the feature, and like give very high transparency on progress. And if you feel like you run into a challenge that could really change course, also to communicate this as early as possible. I think there's no one answer or like one solution to this problem, but I am very aware that it is a problem that all product teams have. And the only way to perfectly deal with this is to really get the communication straight there.
Right, perfect. Thank you very much for the answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Oscar, for the question. We have a new question coming from YouTube channel. Basim asks, how do you handle stakeholder and leadership expectations around the roadmap blocks, and that they don't take the roadmap blocks as promises of delivery dates?
I mean, I think that's like not a big worry that we have a pitch. I mean, obviously, if you add an estimation date and you change it a couple of times, people will ask questions and maybe get frustrated. But we don't really tie big PR campaigns to deliverables, which is a great advantage because you don't have like crazy strict deadlines. But still, so I said we have different formats for different use cases. So for leadership and these stakeholders that don't actively work in the product teams, we have monthly check-ins where we communicate progress, and we are very explicit about deliverable dates or delivery dates being estimations. So if you just started working on something, your estimation is way better than before you start working on it. And if you like have worked on it for, I don't know, let's say 1 or 2 weeks, you will also have a better understanding of whether it's like way longer than what you expected, or if you actually have to sequence it in a different way. And we're really transparent about this in these monthly leadership calls. We give status updates and like allow all kinds of questions, even if like, especially when they're uncomfortable, and also take feedback into account. So if we feel like we're missing these deadlines under quotation marks too often, then there's a process problem. And then this has to be addressed, and not only the stakeholder management.
Okay. Well, I hope that Basim has this answered. It was a very good, very good and insightful answer, by the way. We have a new question coming from LinkedIn. Roxane, how do you manage conflicts in the roadmap and stakeholder priorities that can take the roadmap off track?
Well, I mean, sometimes we just take it off track. I mean, it's like I don't know. I feel like I'm really, you really have to frame it into the right way, because no one tries to take a roadmap off track because they have like bad intentions. It's always like because there's some business impact seen that you might not have seen the moment you plan for the quarter, right? So I think people should just be really open to change, because sometimes it really is for the best, and strong opinions sometimes should be loosely held. And what I really like about pitch is that if you really feel that there is a strong conflict and that it has a negative impact, if you change your roadmap, then it obviously can be addressed. And I would really tell everyone to have the confidence to address it, even if it's your CEO bringing it up, because at the end of the day, as the product owner, you have most of the expertise around why you made certain priorities. And yeah, just like find the right mix for yourself and your team about like being open to changes, but then also holding on to certain decisions if you feel like they are the most impactful thing that you could work on at this very point in time.
Okay, well, I hope that Matt Batina has this question like answered. I like I'm gonna ask a question, but I think Mansoor has this opportunity. I want to ask a question too. You said something that, okay, it is very important to say now we need to get rid of this roadmap, because right now we have like 690 backlog items that we are not completely going to build, and one of the rules is time frame. But realistically talking, it is possible to not avoid the fact that you are going to plan this for the next 3 months, let's say, but at least in my opinion, you're going to still find, going to find some roadblocks that going to push you to, to make this not in 3 months, in 6 months. How do you tackle this? Do you like postpone the job? How do you do another thing? How do you manage when a ticket gets longer?
I think to some extent you can postpone it. I mean, what we saw, some things that felt like very basic, we planned them for the I'm not sure how many of you use Pitch, but in Pitch, there's like no trash feature. So if you delete the presentations, it's just like gone. And we had this on the roadmap already when I joined Pitch. And the idea was always like, yeah, we will just do it next month because it's like super straightforward. But then priorities changed and we kept on like pushing it, and we actually pushed it for 2 years. So we still don't have trash. And I feel like if this happens, like just get rid of it, because you still know that you need it eventually, but like what benefit do you have from like pushing it? You just like always feel like you're like not delivering because people see it on the roadmap, but it just keeps on being pushed. And I think that's just like a question of your own, like, do you feel confident pushing it because you know that you will do it next quarter, or would you rather remove it and reevaluate? So that could actually make your product reviews a bit easier if you just like remove stuff that you feel like you've been dragging around for too long.
And when you have this case where you postpone and let's say, okay, let's do it in the next sprint, do you do this movement on to think about, okay, do we need to do more discovery about this topic? In the case you need to do a discovery to, to get some answers and complete the work for the next sprints, you tweet, or you just go with your initial plan and that's it?
No, I mean, that's a great question, because I feel like if there are multiple reasons why you would push something. One could be because it's just not as impactful as other things. And this would be a good reason to get rid of it if you like over several months feel like it's just like not impactful enough. And the other thing is, if you just like don't know exactly what to do, I would just replace it with a discovery item and say, let's focus our efforts not on building it, but figuring out what it should be.
Okay, I get it. Interesting. Yeah, it is very interesting to see, how the product managers are dealing with those problems that, okay, we have this ticket right now, we cannot solve it. I think that we need more discovery, but CEO asks, we need to to complete this, because if not, we won't make it with the client. So it's very interesting to know, other people's perspective. Okay, Mansoor, I think that we are, if any other people has questions, I see that there is no other questions in the Zoom chat. There is just last question about Rick Caro, and we're gonna take this one as the last one, I guess. Rick Caro asks, will there be more questions around the fact that you remove it if it's a highly requested feature that is now removed from the backlog? Do you want me to repeat it again? Because it was kind of longer, a long one.
Let me rephrase it and you tell me if I understood it correctly. So the question is like, if I get any questions around why important features were removed.
Okay, will be the wrong question, the fact that if you remove it, if it's a higher request. Sorry, Rick Harris is writing now. Sorry for the word jumble. Rick, is that what she mentioned, the right question you want to be answered or not? Now that I see that you are writing. Okay, let's take it no as a yes. The silence is basically, if it's removed, will not that prompt more questions? Okay, he wants to know if this feature is removed, will not that prompt more questions, about the fact that it's removed.
I actually think that we reached such a high quantity of features that people kind of like also lost track, So what we currently, you cannot zoom in pitch right now because our canvas is built in a specific way. We need to refactor it, and then we can offer zooming in and zooming out of presentations. This has been a feature request from day one. Like people, especially coming from other tools, they're used to zoom in. So they're like, why does pitch not allow this? And for us, it was like a strategic question because we were like, maybe people can live without zooming. So we ignored it for a while. And I don't know, a year ago or so, we came to the point where we're like, okay, we kind of have to support it because people really get frustrated. Yeah, this is currently not on the roadmap, and it's not on the roadmap because we will just not build it in the next 3 months because of this refactoring. And it's okay that it's removed because we cannot forget about it because people keep on asking it. And I think that's just like a really good answer. Like if we like keep on ignoring it, it's actual ignorance, it's not because we don't feel that it's not impactful, but because we don't want to do it. And this will never be the case because we take for each planning period, take data, insights, and gut feeling into account. And by not having it on the roadmap for the next 3 months, it doesn't mean that we completely exclude it from the conversation. But when we plan, we bring it up next to other things that we feel are impactful. And this means having stuff like zooming not on a roadmap doesn't mean it's disqualified. It just means that not during the next 3 months.
Okay, I get it. Wow, that was interesting. And I hope that Rick got this solved after, I think, the discovery/research options to see if it's worthwhile. Thank you for the insight. Okay, that's his answer. Okay, we are almost 7:30, and I think we are going to conclude the presentation for today. Thank you so much for the questions. But first, before you go, we like to take a short survey. So Mansoor is gonna send a link to all of you through all the channels, YouTube channel, the Zoom channel, so you can do this survey with for us. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Roxane Hassler, to be here, explain everything about, like this hard path to, okay, let's kill the roadmap and start again, and let's learn about the errors from the past, and, to be more focused on the things that we can do in the future. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much to everyone here. And please, if you want to know more about the events, go to Meetup and join us in the next week. If you want to chat, you can use the Telegram chat. And if you want to support us, you have Patreon link there. Thank you so much.